start of last year, McLaren arrived to the F1 season with a car that was terrible. In the first race alone, Oscar's car stopped working, and Lando Norris had to make 6 pit stops to keep his car from breaking down. At the last Formula 1 race in Singapore, Lando Norris won by over 20 seconds, with Oscar Piastri on the podium. How on earth have McLaren become Formula 1's most dominant team in such a short space of time? Is it just a bend of the rules, or is it something more than that? McLaren were genuinely atrocious at the start of 2023, and not just midfield car bad. It was we are struggling to score any points at all bad. In the first 5 rounds of 2023, McLaren scored only 14 points, with Miami probably being the lowest point, a race where Lando and Oscar were running 17th and 19th. But then fast forward a year, and Lando Norris has won that race. So let's talk about what McLaren did to change this terrible car. So at the start of the year, it's really important to note that team CEO Zak Brown was very open about the fact that they'd under-delivered with their car. And he was honest with us, saying that the car was not as it was intended to be at the start of the year. But he did say he was determined to bring the car up to where it was planned to be, and even start bringing more upgrades after that fact. Now, at the time, it wasn't exactly taken as gospel that McLaren would improve. You have to remember where we're actually coming from. The god-awful McLaren Honda era wasn't and still isn't particularly out of our minds. And McLaren as a team over the past 6 years or so, despite using different engine manufacturers like Renault and currently Mercedes, they still haven't been particularly consistent. I mean, sure, there's a podium here and there, maybe a win or a pole position, but other than that, they weren't really considered a contender for the big 3. Those big 3 being Red Bull, Mercedes, and Ferrari, the 3 teams that for the most part have been on top for the last 10 years. So McLaren would plan to use 2023 as pretty much a catch-up year. They believed they did have a strong development plan and a good concept that would work for the car, but they sort of had to prove that to everyone. Just talking the talk is never enough to make people like you and me believe F1 teams. How many times have we heard the story that things are going to be better by the end of the year, and they're just not? So things would start off slowly. The first real sign of improvement for McLaren was Lando Norris qualifying 3rd for the Spanish Grand Prix, a result he would quickly throw away when he smashed his front wing into Lewis Hamilton's car on the opening lap. But it was 2 rounds later in Austria where things seemed to take a real turn for McLaren. Lando would all of a sudden walk home with a 4th place finish, scoring the most points the team had seen in a race at that point in the year. And going into Silverstone, the team were feeling reasonably positive as more upgrades were on the way. And then this happened. In just 11 rounds, McLaren had gone from a backmarker to a podium sitter. And people started to believe that Zak Brown wasn't just chatting, well, complete balls. A strong reason as to why this was is because of who's now working at that McLaren team. When they turned up in an embarrassing fashion at the start of 2023, McLaren team principal Andrea Stella was quick to point fingers and take action, with Stella only walking into the actual role of team principal after Andreas Seidel had left the job at the end of 2022. Yes, I know it's really confusing that McLaren have had 2 different team principals with very similar names, one right after the other. But at the start of 2023, gone from McLaren was their technical director, James Key, who was the one believed to be responsible for the abysmal start to the year. And as Key's replacements came a 3-person technical team. The first member was ex-Red Bull engineer Peter P. And then there was Ferrari's David Sanchez, and perhaps most important of all, Rob Marshall. Okay, Rob Marshall might sound like your next door neighbor, but he's not. In fact, he's part of the exclusive inner circle that worked alongside top-level designer Adrian Newey, who only designed the most dominant Formula 1 cars of the 90s, like the Williams, and the RB19 of 2023, arguably the most dominant F1 car ever. So it's safe to say Marshall had worked alongside the best. and had been a part of great championship-worthy and championship-winning cars. McLaren had been able to put together a pretty great technical team, and that was starting to pay off. By the end of 2023, McLaren were racking up big points between their drivers, with Piastri even able to get his first podium in Japan during his rookie year. McLaren seemed to meet all their goals and achieve everything apart from the ever elusive race victory. Until this year, 2024 has seen McLaren go to even further heights than before. Sure, they might have started off where they ended in 2023, just pushing Red Bull for podiums, but all that changed, as mentioned before, in the seaside city of Miami, where Lando Norris, well, yes, thanks to some safety car shenanigans, did manage to grab McLaren a win. And that changed everything. Red Bull's car development began to look relatively slow, whereas McLaren kept up that rapid development rate they've been having since last year. And maybe they developed just a bend in the rules though, to get around the regulations and give themselves an advantage. Well, when Oscar Piastri won in Baku, other Formula One teams noticed something interesting, and that was all to do with how the rear wing of the McLaren operated. You see, the team had pushed the limits of the regulations to allow their rear wing to essentially give them a mini DRS effect when under a large aerodynamic load, such as, I don't know, maybe the straight at Baku. And it would flex back up during the corners, giving them good cornering speed too. Now, under the regulations, Formula One cars are not allowed to have parts flexing over a certain amount. So as they always do, the other Formula One teams protested McLaren's little innovation. The FIA, however, were happy McLaren's wings were within the regulations. But what was more interesting than that was the response from McLaren. See, everyone has started to pin down McLaren's recent domination on this little innovation, but the team were almost dismissive of it. Not only did McLaren not use this spec of rear wing during the Singapore Grand Prix, the most dominant win of them yet, but they offered to make changes and not use it again, despite the FIA saying it was absolutely fine. See, McLaren don't seem to have just one advantage over the grid. It's their whole package that's paying off, and it's the absolutely brilliant job the team have done of developing the car. Sure, they are able to find those advantages here and there, but McLaren since 2023 have just been on an unstoppable rampage to constantly improve their car, and it's been working. Unlike other teams such as Red Bull and Aston Martin, who've had struggles with their development always going in the right direction. So that is how McLaren have not just gone from being a backmarker to being F1's most dominant current team. But sure, the momentum is with them now. The only thing left to say is, will it stay that way, not just for the rest of the year, but into 2025 too? If you want to know, please subscribe, because I'm going to keep you updated on everything Formula One. Thank you for watching, thank you to the channel members, and goodbye!